It was the kind of morning that Louisiana makes look effortless, the sun pressing gold through cypress trees, the air thick with the smell of river mud and jasmine, the whole world carrying on as if nothing in it could ever go wrong. St. Mary Parish, Louisiana, August 1992. A community of roughly 12,000 souls tucked between sugar cane fields and the slow, brown patience of the Atchafalaya Basin, where the water moves with no particular urgency, and the land itself seems reluctant to give up its secrets. Her name was Delamie Trosclair. She was 31 years old. She had brown eyes that her sister described as the kind that made you feel like she was always on the verge of laughing at something only she could see. She was a mother of two. She worked the early shift at a diner called Louisiana's on Main Street in Centerville, where she knew every regular by name and kept a small photograph of her children tucked beneath the cash register so she could glance at it between orders. On the morning of August 14th, 1992, Delamie Trosclair walked out of that diner at the end of her shift, got into her brown 1987 Chevrolet Caprice, and drove away, and no one who loved her ever saw her alive again. The question that would haunt this community for more than 2 decades was not simply what happened to Delamie Trosclair. The question, the one that deputies wrote in margins, that neighbors carried in their chests, that her children grew up unable to answer, was this: how does a woman disappear in a place where everybody knows everybody? And why did the one person who should have been searching the hardest seem so completely, so inexplicably at peace? St. Mary Parish sits in south-central Louisiana like a world unto itself. It is bayou country in the truest sense, a geography that does not simply surround you but absorbs you. The Atchafalaya, the widest river in America, bleeds into this land through channels and oxbow lakes and stretches of black water where cypress knees rise from the surface like crooked fingers. In the summer of 1992, Centerville was a working-class town that smelled like hot asphalt and fried food, and the faint chemical sweetness from the sugar mill that ran shifts through the cane harvest season. People here did not have much, but most of them had community. They had front porches. They had casseroles at funerals and prayer chains that spread through the Baptist churches faster than any telephone. The Trosclair family, Delamie and her husband, Ramai Trosclair, age 34, had lived on Beaumont Road since their marriage in 1987. The house was a modest, pale yellow wood frame structure with a chain-link fence around the yard, and a crepe myrtle that Delamie had planted herself the spring after they moved in. Ramai worked at the boat dock operation owned by a man named Gerald Fontenot, managing inventory and logistics for the commercial fishing vessels that worked the basin. It was steady work. It did not make anyone rich, but it kept the lights on and the children fed. The children were Kaylee, age 7, and Marcus, age 4. Kaylee had her mother's eyes. Marcus had a red toy truck he carried everywhere. By all outward appearances, the Trosclair household was ordinary to the point of invisibility. Delamie was well-liked, perhaps better liked than her husband, though in communities like Centerville people tend to swallow those observations and not offer them up without being asked. She sang in the second row of the choir at New Hope Baptist. She was the kind of woman who remembered birthdays. Her co-worker at Louisiana's diner, a woman named Patrice Melanchon who had worked alongside Delamie for 4 years, would later tell investigators that Delamie had seemed quieter than usual in the weeks before she disappeared. Not sad exactly, Patrice would say, but careful, like she was measuring her words before she let them out. On the morning of August 14th, 1992, a Friday, Delamie Trosclair arrived at Louisiana's diner at 4:45 in the morning to begin the breakfast shift. The parking lot light on the south side had been out for a week, and she always parked under it anyway out of habit, leaving her brown caprice at a slight angle in the third space from the door. Patris Melanchthon arrived at 5, and the two women worked the breakfast rush together. Biscuits and boudin, coffee so strong it looked like motor oil, the usual parade of oil field workers and cane hands and local government employees who started their days before the rest of the world had considered waking. The morning was unremarkable. Delamie laughed at a joke told by a regular named Herbert Prejean. She refilled the napkin dispensers on tables 4 through 8 during the slow moment between 7 and 7:30. She ate half a piece of toast at the counter and said she wasn't particularly hungry. At approximately 10 minutes past 11 in the morning, her shift ended. She removed her apron. She said goodbye to Patris. She said, and Patris would repeat this for investigators, for neighbors, for a documentary camera many years later with no variation whatsoever. She said, "I'll see you Monday, cher." Just like always, just like every Friday. Delamie Trosclair walked out of Louella's diner at 11:12 in the morning. The sky was the white blue of a Louisiana August, the kind of heat that makes the air above the asphalt ripple like water. She got into her brown caprice. She pulled out of the lot onto Main Street heading east. A man named Doyle Boudreau, who ran the hardware store across the street, would later tell the St. Mary Parish Sheriff's Office that he had seen her car pass his window. He noticed it only because her left rear brake light was out, a detail he had noticed before, and he had thought idly that she ought to get that fixed. That was the last confirmed sighting of Delamie Trosclair alive. She did not arrive home. She did not stop at the Piggly Wiggly on Highway 182, which Remy Trosclair would later say she had mentioned she intended to do. She did not call her mother, Edna Arsenault, who lived 20 minutes away in Jeanneret, and who spoke to her daughter by telephone nearly every afternoon. The phone rang that Friday afternoon at Edna's house. Delamie did not call. Remy Trosclair told investigators that he had not become concerned until approximately 5:30 in the afternoon. He said he had assumed she was visiting her mother or running errands. He said he had been at the dock until 3, had come home, made a sandwich, watched television, put the children down for a rest. He called Edna at 5:30, he said, and only then learned that Edna had not heard from Delamie either. He called the sheriff's office at 6:14 that evening. The swing in the backyard hung still. The red toy truck lay on its side in the grass. The call for a missing person brought 2 deputies to Beaumont Road by 7 o'clock. Remy Trosclair met them at the door of the yellow wood frame house in a clean shirt. He was calm. He answered their questions directly. He offered them sweet tea, which they declined. Deputy Earl Thibodeaux, who was one of the 2 officers who responded that evening, would note in his incident report that Remy Trosclair was cooperative and expressed appropriate concern. He would later revise that characterization. Not in his report, in conversations. In the margins of memory, where deputies tend to keep the things that do not yet amount to evidence. By Saturday morning, August 15th, 1992, the search for Delamie Trosclair had grown beyond the capacity of 2 deputies and a phone call. The St. Mary Parish Sheriff's Office organized a coordinated search effort involving roughly 40 personnel, deputies, wildlife agents from the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, and volunteers from the community who gathered in the parking lot of New Hope Baptist Church at 6 in the morning with flashlights and bug spray, and the particular grim determination of people who hoped to find their neighbor alive and feared they would not. The search was methodical in the way that rural Louisiana searches tend to be, which is to say it was also shaped by the geography itself, a landscape that does not yield information easily. Teams moved through the basin-adjacent areas south of Centerville along designated corridors. Boats were deployed in the waterways off Route 317. Dogs were brought in from a unit in Lafayette. The brown Caprice was located on the afternoon of August 15th, a Saturday, approximately 26 hours after Delami's last confirmed sighting, parked on a gravel turnaround at the end of Landry Levy Road, a secluded stretch of elevated ground about 4.5 miles east of the diner. The car was unlocked. Delami's purse was inside on the passenger seat, her wallet still in it with $37 in cash and her identification. Her keys were not in the ignition. They were not in the car at all. The passenger door showed no signs of force. The back seat was empty. A styrofoam cup that appeared to contain a residue of coffee was in the center console. The exterior of the car was undisturbed. The left rear brake light, as Doyle Boudreaux had observed, was out. There was no sign of Delamy Trosclair. The community response was enormous by the standards of a town that size. By Sunday, the volunteer count had exceeded 200. Church women organized food and water stations. The local radio station, KBZE out of Morgan City, ran hourly updates. A hand-lettered sign appeared in the window of the hardware store. "Please come home, DELLAMAE." Edna Arsenault, Delami's mother, stood at the edge of the search area each morning in a floral house dress, watching, and did not cry in public, because she was the kind of woman who believed weeping could wait. Remy Trosclair attended the organized search on Saturday and Sunday. He wore the same canvas work shirt both days. He spoke to media when they arrived from the Morgan City Daily Review and later from the Lafayette Advertiser, saying his wife was a wonderful woman and that he prayed for her safe return. He was photographed standing with his arms folded in front of the yellow house. He did not weep in the photographs. Those who knew him said this was not unusual. That Remy had always been a contained man, not given to public displays of any particular emotion. Others said less charitable things in quieter voices. But there is a long distance between a feeling in the gut and a fact that will hold up, and in August of 1992, the investigators did not yet have facts. What they had were inconsistencies. The first was the matter of the odometer. When deputies processed Delami's Caprice at the Landry Levy Road turnaround, they noted the vehicle's current mileage. Cross-referencing with an oil change receipt found in the glove compartment dated July 28, 1992, approximately 2.5 weeks prior, the mileage recorded at the time of the oil change and the mileage at the time of the car's recovery indicated that the vehicle had traveled more miles than would be accounted for by Delami's known routine. Home to diner, diner to mother's house, occasional errands in town. The discrepancy was not enormous. It was, in fact, easy to dismiss. It amounted to roughly 80 to 90 additional miles over a 2.5-week period. But the Landry Levy Road turnaround was only 4.5 miles from the diner. The route from the diner to that turnaround, the most direct route by road, was 4.8 miles. For the car to have been driven there by Delamy herself, simply by Delamy, making a choice, parking and walking or being taken somewhere, did not adequately resolve the odometer question. Deputy Earl Thibodeaux noted this in a supplemental report filed August 18, 1992. His supervisor, Chief Deputy Maurice Arsenault, no relation to Delamy's family, reviewed the report and did not dismiss it, but also did not yet assign it significant weight. The second inconsistency was a matter of time. Remy Trosclair had stated that he did not call Edna Arsenault until 5:30 in the afternoon, but a telephone company record obtained by investigators showed that a call had been placed from the landline at 304 Beaumont Road to the boat dock operated by Gerald Fontenot at 2:47 in the afternoon. A short call, less than 2 minutes. Gerald Fontenot told investigators that he did not recall the call or its content with certainty. He believed Remy had asked something about a schedule. Remy, when asked about this call, said he remembered making it but could not recall the specific reason. He did not express any particular anxiety about being asked. Deputies whispered quietly about this: the call, the composure, the clean shirt. They whispered because whispering is what you do when you have a feeling that the law has not yet caught up with. The third inconsistency was offered, almost accidentally, by Marcus, the 4-year-old Delamy's younger child. During a welfare check conducted by a female deputy assigned to the children on August 17th, Marcus, in the way of small children who have not yet learned the architecture of what to share and what to hold, said something that the deputy transcribed verbatim in her notes. "Daddy said Mama was going to be gone for a while. He said it before." The deputy noted the statement. She noted that she could not determine when the statement had been made by Remai or what its context had been. Children of 4 do not carry context reliably. The note was added to the file and the file grew heavy and the summer kept going. The physical investigation of the Landry-Levy Road turnaround yielded limited forensic results. Soil samples were collected. The area was photographed extensively. Cadaver dogs indicated interest in a section of the levee embankment approximately 30 feet from where the Caprice had been parked, but a ground investigation of that area produced no remains. The basin, for its part, kept whatever it kept. By mid-September of 1992, with no body, no weapon, no witness to a crime, and no forensic evidence sufficient to establish that a crime had definitively occurred, only a missing woman and a community's worth of unease, the active investigation began to slow. Resources were pulled. Other cases pressed. The file on Delamy Trosclair grew organized and still, the way cold case files do, full of paper and empty of movement. The crepe myrtle in the yard on Beaumont Road bloomed pink that September, as it always had, indifferent to everything. Music becomes sparse, a single piano note, reverb long and aching. By spring of 1993, 8 months after Delamy Trosclair was last seen walking out of Lauella's diner on a white sky Friday morning, the yellow house on Beaumont Road had been sold. Remai Trosclair and the 2 children had relocated to Huma, Louisiana, roughly an hour and a half east, far enough to be a new place, close enough that it could not quite be called a genuine departure. He found work with a marine supply company. He enrolled Kaylee in the 2nd grade and Marcus in a pre-K program at a church-affiliated day care. He attended a local Catholic parish, which was a shift from the Baptist tradition of his wife's family, though whether this represented belief or convenience, no one who observed it could say for certain. Edna Arsenault told investigators during a follow-up interview in March of 1993 that she had not spoken to Remai since the move. She said this without visible bitterness, which was in some ways more unsettling than if she had wept or raged. She said she spoke to Kaylee on the telephone every other Sunday, and that Remai permitted this without apparent objection. She said Marcus had stopped asking where his mother was by around November, the way small children sometimes do, not because they have forgotten or understood, but because children are adaptive in ways that break the hearts of everyone watching. For those who have ever doubted someone they loved, who have sat across a table from a person and known, in the part of the mind that does not require evidence, that something fundamental is wrong, the silence that follows that knowledge is its own particular weight. It does not lift. It does not resolve. It simply accumulates. Kaylee Trosclair, 7 years old in August of 1992, 8 by the time the family moved to Huma, began drawing pictures in her 2nd grade class that her teacher, a woman named Mrs. Sandra Duet, would quietly describe to a social worker who made a routine school visit in October of 1993. The drawings were not alarming, precisely. They were the work of a child, imprecise and emotionally legible in the way children's art tends to be. But they recurred. A brown car. Water. A woman with brown eyes standing apart from a group of figures. Mrs. Duet kept several of the drawings in a folder, which she passed to the social worker, who passed it to a contact at the Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Office, who logged it and did nothing further with it at that time. Marcus began having nightmares by the time he was 5. He could not articulate their content. He woke reaching for the red toy truck which he had kept. Remy Trosclair, by all observable measures during this period, was managing. He was not warm, but he was adequate. He showed up for school functions. He kept the apartment, a 2-bedroom on a modest street near the waterfront, reasonably maintained. Co-workers at the Marine Supply Company described him as reliable and quiet. He did not speak about Delamie except when asked directly, at which point he said she had gone missing, that it was an ongoing investigation, and that he hoped for resolution. He said this in the same tone he used to discuss inventory discrepancies. It was the composure, people noted later. Not grief composure. There is a difference, though it is one that is difficult to explain to someone who has not been close enough to both to feel the distinction in the room. His relationship with a woman in Huma, a woman named Brenda Thuriot, who worked at the Marine Supply Company in the accounting department, became known to those around him sometime in the spring of 1994, approximately a year and a half after Delamie's disappearance. Brenda Thuriot was 30 years old, dark-haired, and by all accounts had no knowledge of the specific weight of what she was walking into. Those who observed the relationship noted later that Remy seemed, in Brenda's company, lighter than he had ever been in Centerville, more like a man who had put something down. The children watched this. Children always watch. Edna Arsenault drove to Huma on a Tuesday in September of 1994 without calling ahead. She parked in the lot of the apartment complex and sat in her car for 35 minutes by her own account. Then she drove back to Jeanerette. She called the St. Mary Parish Sheriff's Office the following morning and asked to speak to whoever was currently assigned to her daughter's case. She was told the case remained open, but was not actively assigned. She asked if there were any updates. She was told there were not. She thanked the person on the telephone. She hung up. She began writing things down after that. Everything she remembered about the weeks before Delamie disappeared. The way Delamie's voice had sounded in their last few phone calls. A comment Delamie had made in July of 1992 that Edna had not thought significant at the time, that Remy had been going somewhere in the evenings and she did not know where. A time Kaylee had called Edna from a payphone, which had struck Edna as strange because there was a telephone in the house, and Kaylee had said only that she missed her grandmother, and then been quiet for a long moment before hanging up. Edna Arsenault mailed these notes to the St. Mary Parish Sheriff's Office in November of 1994. She received a form acknowledgement letter. She kept a copy of everything she had sent. She kept a copy of the acknowledgement. She filed them in a manila envelope she labeled with Delamie's full name and the word justice in capital letters. She kept that envelope on the shelf above her kitchen table for the next several years. By 1996, Remy and Brenda Thuriot had moved together into a house in Gray, Louisiana, a small community in Lafourche Parish. Kaylee was 11. Marcus was 8. The red toy truck had been lost somewhere in the move. Marcus never mentioned it again, but his sister would recall later that he had cried the night they realized it was gone. A quiet, private kind of crying that she had pretended not to notice because it seemed to her, even at 11, that some griefs are made worse by being witnessed. Clear's throat. The crepe myrtle on Beaumont Road, now belonging to whoever had bought the yellow house, continued to bloom every September, pink and oblivious as flowers tend to be. Music returns, building now. a sustained tension like pressure behind the ears before a storm. It was March of 2014. 21 years and 7 months after Della Mee Trosclair walked out of Louiella's diner into a white sky Louisiana morning and disappeared. 21 years during which the file sat organized and still in the St. Mary Parish Sheriff's archives. 21 years during which Edna Arsenault had grown old, and Marcus Trosclair had grown into a quiet man of 26. And Kaylee Trosclair had married and moved to Baton Rouge and given birth to a daughter she named Me. It started, as these things sometimes do, not with new forensic technology or a deathbed confession, but with a child saying something. Kaylee Trosclair, who was, by 2014, 30 years old, 1 year younger than her mother had been when she vanished, had, over a period of months, been speaking with a therapist in Baton Rouge. This was not unusual. Kaylee had sought therapy periodically since her early 20s, doing the quiet work of trying to understand the shape of what she carried. In a session in late February of 2014, Kaylee said something that she had carried for 21 years and had never, not once, said aloud to another adult. She said that on the morning of August 14, 1992, the morning her mother disappeared, she had been awake before she was supposed to be. She had been awake because a sound had woken her. She was 7 years old and she had gotten out of bed and she had gone to the hallway and she had seen her father returning to the house at approximately 6 in the morning, before Della Mee had even left for her shift. He had been in work clothes. He had been wet. He had not seen her. She had gone back to bed and had told herself, in the specific and heartbreaking logic of a 7-year-old who already understood that some things in a house are not to be spoken of, that she had probably dreamed it. She had not dreamed it. Her therapist, following mandatory reporting obligations, contacted law enforcement. Because of the jurisdictional history of the original case, the matter was referred to the St. Mary Parish Sheriff's Office, where a detective named Raymond Boudreau, no relation to the hardware store owner, had recently been assigned to review cold case files as part of a state-funded initiative. Detective Boudreau pulled the Trosclair file in early March of 2014. He read Earl Thibodeaux's original reports. He read the supplemental notes on the odometer. He read the transcription of what 4-year-old Marcus had said about his father telling him his mother would be gone for a while, before she was gone. He read Edna Arsenault's handwritten notes, which had been filed and preserved and never acted upon. He read Mrs. Sandra Duet's description of Kaylee's drawings. He said later, in an interview given to the Louisiana State Police Communications Office, that reading the file felt like watching a photograph develop, that the image had been there the entire time, and that what had been needed was simply enough light applied over enough time. Clear's throat. Detective Boudreau contacted the Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Office and the Lafourche Parish Sheriff's Office, since Remai Trosclair was now residing in their jurisdiction. A joint investigative task force was assembled in April of 2014, involving detectives from 3 parishes and a forensic consultant from the Louisiana State Police Crime Laboratory. The task force began by re-examining every piece of physical evidence from 1992 that had been preserved. Soil samples from the Landry-Levy Road turnaround, the original photographs of Della Mee's Caprice, the cassette tape recording of Remai Trosclair's initial interview with deputies on the night of August 14th. They listened to that tape carefully. In it, Remai stated that he had been home all day after returning from the dock at 3 in the afternoon. He stated this twice, unprompted, once in response to a general question, and once when a deputy had asked whether he had left the house for any reason during the afternoon. He had not been asked about the morning. In 1992, there had been no reason to ask about the morning. Della Mee was known to have been at work until 11. Whatever had happened investigators assumed, happened after 11. Kaylee's account changed the morning entirely. Armed with a refreshed investigative premise, the task force obtained historical cellular records, the limited records that existed from 1992, and reviewed the original telephone company logs again. They found the call Remai had made to the dock at 2:47 on August 14th. They found it again with fresh eyes, and this time they sat with what it meant. A man who claimed to have been home all day, peacefully making sandwiches and watching television, making a business call to his workplace during regular business hours. A man who said he had no particular reason to call, no particular memory of why. A man who, 8 months later, would move his children to a city an hour away and begin building a new life with the efficiency of someone who had known such rebuilding was eventual. In October of 2014, investigators applied for and received a search warrant for a specific stretch of the Atchafalaya Basin accessible from the Landry Levee Road area. The same area where cadaver dogs had indicated interest in 1992, extended by updated forensic mapping of the basin's current and historical water levels and soil composition. Using ground-penetrating radar and a team from the Louisiana State Police, they conducted a systematic survey over 3 days. On the second day, October 17, 2014, in an area of compacted sediment approximately 40 feet from the Levee Road's edge, they located human remains. The remains were partial, as remains submerged or partially submerged in bioadjacent soil for more than 2 decades tend to be. But they were sufficient. Forensic odontology, a comparison of the recovered teeth with Delamie Trosclair's dental records, which Edna Arsenault had preserved in a folder alongside her other documents all these years, produced a positive identification. The remains were those of Delamie Marie Trosclair, age 31, of Centerville, Louisiana. Edna Arsenault was notified by phone on the morning of October 19, 2014. She was 82 years old. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, reportedly only, "I knew she was there." She said it the way you say something you have known for a very long time, when the knowing is finally permitted to exist in the world outside your chest. Clears throat. The arrest of Remai Joseph Trosclair, age 56, took place on November 3, 2014, at his residence in Gray, Louisiana, at 7:42 in the morning. He was in the driveway when the task force vehicles arrived. He was wearing work clothes, canvas, the same kind of practical working man's garment he had worn in the photographs taken during the 1992 search. Detective Raymond Boudreau would later describe the moment of arrest in a press briefing with the particular economy of a man who has learned not to offer more than the facts require. He said, "Mr. Trosclair was taken into custody without incident." He did not elaborate on Remai's expression or his words in that moment. He did not need to. The arrest itself, after 22 years and 2 months and 19 days, was the statement. The community response was immediate and divided in the way that community responses to long-delayed arrests often are. In Centerville, among those who had known Delamie and Remai in 1992, there was a complicated, exhausted relief. Patrice Melanchon, who still lived in St. Mary Parish and had thought of Delamie every single Friday for 22 years. Every time a customer left and she said, "See you Monday," told a reporter from the Huma Courier that she had always known. She said, "Some things you know in your body. The knowing just doesn't have anywhere to go until the law catches up." Doyle Boudreau of the hardware store said nothing to the press, but was observed removing and folding the hand-lettered sign, "Please come home," DELLAMAE, which he had kept in the window of his store, framed, since August of 1992. He folded it carefully and put it somewhere behind the counter. In Huma and Gray, among those who had known Remai Trosclair in his later life, co-workers, neighbors, the members of the Catholic parish. The reaction was shock of a specific and disorienting kind. One neighbor, speaking anonymously to a television reporter from WDSU New Orleans, said that Remai had been a quiet man and a good neighbor, and that she simply could not reconcile the person she knew with what she was being told. This is the thing about people who carry what Remai Trosclair apparently carried. They do not carry it visibly. They carry it in the locked rooms of themselves, and the outside of them goes about its business. Brenda Thuriot, who had been with Remai for nearly 20 years, did not speak to the media. Kaylee Trosclair, 30 years old, living in Baton Rouge with her daughter, issued a brief written statement through her attorney. "I have spent my entire life trying to understand what happened to my mother. I no longer have to wonder. I only ask that the system complete what it has finally begun." She did not speak publicly beyond this statement. The weight of what she had carried, the image of a 7-year-old girl standing in a hallway in the dark, watching her wet-clothed father return to a house he should not yet have left, belonged to her, and she did not owe its details to anyone. Marcus Trosclair, 26, issued no public statement. The case against Remai Joseph Trosclair proceeded through the Louisiana state court system, with the deliberate pace of a prosecution built on evidence gathered and preserved over 2 decades. The district attorney's office for St. Mary Parish, in coordination with the multi-parish task force, charged Remai Trosclair with second-degree homicide in the death of Della Mee Marie Trosclair. The physical evidence included the forensically identified remains, the odometer discrepancy from the original investigation, the preserved soil samples that, with updated analysis techniques, showed trace biological material consistent with the case timeline, and the testimony of Kaylee Trosclair regarding the early morning of August 14, 1992. The prosecution's forensic consultant testified to the manner in which remains of this specific composition, and in this specific geographical context, would have arrived at their location, that the evidence was consistent, in her professional assessment, with the remains having been placed at that location between 12 and 36 hours of the date of Della Mee's disappearance. She testified that the distance between the Trosclair residence on Beaumont Road and the Landry-Levy Road turnaround was consistent with a route that could be completed and returned from in under 40 minutes at that hour of a Friday morning. Remai Trosclair did not testify in his own defense. His defense attorneys, a team from a criminal practice in New Orleans, argued that the physical evidence, while compelling, did not directly place Remai Trosclair at the site on that date, that the testimony of a child recalling a single observation from 22 years prior was subject to the well-documented fallibility of childhood memory, and that the prosecutorial case, while emotionally powerful, rested on inference and accumulation rather than direct proof. They were not wrong that the case was largely circumstantial. Circumstantial cases, built with enough evidence and precision, have always been capable of satisfying the standard required. The jury, 12 residents of St. Mary Parish, people from Bayou Country, from communities not entirely unlike the one where Della Mee had sung in the choir and kept her children's photograph beneath a cash register, deliberated for 11 hours across 2 days. They returned on a cold Thursday afternoon in February of 2016, gray clouds sitting low over Morgan City, where the trial had been moved for venue purposes. The courthouse, an old building with high ceilings and windows that rattled when the Gulf wind came up the basin. The verdict was guilty of second-degree homicide. Remai Joseph Trosclair showed no visible reaction when the verdict was read. He sat with his hands on the table and his face arranged in an expression that those who observed it in the courtroom would later struggle to describe precisely. Not shocked, not broken, something more like a man who has arrived, after a very long walk, at the destination he always knew was waiting. His attorneys leaned in and spoke to him, and he listened and nodded, and was led out of the courtroom by two sheriff's deputies, and the door closed behind them, and the gallery, which had been completely silent, released a collective sound that was not quite a sound, more like a breath held so long it had become structural. Edna Arsenault was 83 years old, and she was in that gallery. She sat in the third row, on the aisle, in a floral dress not entirely different from the one she had worn in 1992, standing at the edge of the search area, watching. When the verdict was read, she closed her eyes. She kept them closed for a long moment. Then she opened them, and she looked at the empty seat at the defense table where Remy Trosclair had been sitting 60 seconds before, and she opened her hands in her lap, and she exhaled. She had driven herself to the courthouse. She drove herself home. The manila envelope labeled with her daughter's full name, and the word justice in capital letters, remained on the shelf above the kitchen table in Jeanerette for the rest of Edna Arsenault's life. Not because she had forgotten to take it down, but because she had decided to leave it there. Remy Joseph Trosclair was sentenced on April 14, 2016, to life in the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola. He was 58 years old. He made no statement at sentencing. He was transported to Angola 2 weeks later. The sentence was mandatory under the terms of Louisiana law for conviction of second-degree homicide. He would spend the remainder of his life within the walls of that institution, which sits on a long bend of the Mississippi River, surrounded by water on 3 sides, in a landscape not entirely unlike the bayou country where he had lived and the basin where he had, on a white sky August morning in 1992, left his wife. Clear's throat. There are details from this case that never fully resolved, in the way that cold cases almost never fully resolve spaces where the record is complete, and the human understanding of what actually occurred in those spaces remains, and will always remain, partial. The specific sequence of events on the morning of August 14, 1992. The nature of whatever conversation had occurred, or not occurred, in that yellow house on Beaumont Road in the weeks before. The 2 minutes of a telephone call to a boat dock, whose content no one could subsequently recall with certainty. The 80 to 90 extra miles on the odometer of a brown 1987 Chevrolet Caprice. These remain in the file, organized and still, the way things remain when they have run out of questions to answer, and yet have not quite answered all of them. What is complete is Delamie Trosclair. She is no longer missing. She is found and named, and the system that took 22 years to act on her behalf has acted, and the man who caused her to be missing has been held accountable by the law of the state of Louisiana, and by 12 of her fellow citizens who sat in a courthouse on a cold Thursday in February, and decided that the evidence they had been given was sufficient, and that Delamie Marie Trosclair deserved at least that much. The crepe myrtle on Beaumont Road in Centerville bloomed pink the September after the verdict, as it had every September since Delamie had planted it, as it has continued to do each year since. Whoever lives in the yellow house now, and the house has changed hands more than once since 1987, may not know what was planted there or who planted it, or why the tree is the particular pink that it is, because crepe myrtles do not carry their histories in any way that is legible to the people who walk past them. They simply bloom. They bloom and they hang on and they keep coming back, season after season, regardless of what the ground around them holds. That is something. In cases like this, it has to be something. Music fades to the single accordion note from the opening, softer now, resolving into something that is not quite peace, but is not quite grief either. The sound of a thing that has been put to rest. What this case represents, what it will always represent for those who knew Della Mee, who searched for her, who kept her name in manila envelopes and in framed signs in hardware store windows, and in the photographs their children drew in second-grade classrooms, is the distance that can exist between what a community senses and what the law can act upon. 22 years is not an abstraction. It is the entirety of a childhood. It is old enough to vote and to drive and to have a daughter of your own and name her after someone you lost before you were old enough to understand what loss meant. It is Edna Arsenault driving to Huma on a Tuesday and sitting in a parking lot for 35 minutes and then driving home, because there was nothing else to do, and doing it anyway. Justice, in cases like this one, is never fully equal to what was taken. It is only the closest approximation that human systems can manage. For Della Mee Trosclair, who sang in the second row of the choir and kept a photograph of her children beneath a cash register and told her coworker every Friday, "I'll see you Monday, Cher." For her, the approximation came. It came late, and it came because a 7-year-old girl stood in a dark hallway and saw something she spent 21 years telling herself she might have dreamed, and because one day she sat across from a therapist and said it out loud, and because the manila envelope had been kept, and because the soil samples had been preserved, and because Earl Thibodeaux had written down a detail about an odometer that no one acted on for 2 decades. In investigations, the smallest details survive the longest. They wait for the right question. They wait for the moment when someone opens the file with enough light. Della Mee Marie Trosclair, born 1961, gone August 14, 1992, found October 17, 2014, remembered always.